My areas of expertise are public international law, the law governing relations between nations, energy law and environmental law. And I was a member of the Royal Society working group that produced the report on geoengineering the climate. When we talk about geoengineering, it's important to bear in mind two aspects. One is that there are a range of techniques, from carbon reduction through to solar radiation management, and there are several key differences between them that any governance regime for research or deployment needs to bear in mind. The first, of course, is the extent to which you can encapsulate the technology. That is to say, is it something that can be deployed locally, where the consequences will not be significant regionally or transnationally or globally? So we can contrast air capture, for example, of CO2 with large solar arrays designed to reflect the sun's radioactive effect. The former can be dealt with on a small scale through local planning and environmental controls. The latter, of course, requires a degree of international cooperation. We're not quite sure what the long-term consequences will be. A second issue from the viewpoint of research is, can you do modelling or small-scale field trials where the impact is slight in terms of human, environmental, social, economic terms? Or does research require large-scale field trials, perhaps in an internationalized domain? And the example I would use in the latter context is ocean iron fertilization. There's already been some anxiety expressed in international bodies about the potential environmental impact of even large-scale field trial research in the marine environment. So there, any kind of governance of the research side, where you do need to get out into the field to trial, will necessarily require a degree of international governance and oversight that our smaller scale air capture, for example, on the carbon reduction side, will not. So one of the challenges for the legal regulation of geoengineering techniques is looking to see where that technique will be located. To come back to an example I used earlier of the carbon reduction method, the CO2 capture, it's possible to envisage that that could take place within the territory of a single state, where it clearly has jurisdiction and control over the activity, and there are no transboundary consequences. Now, you'll still need to regulate it in terms of permitting the activity, and there may still be, of course, an international dimension, because CO2 capture may need to be accounted for within the wider climate change framework. So a state who's regulating an activity wholly within its own territory may still want that technology to be considered for carbon credit in the international governance structure, assuming that we have one after 2012, when the Kyoto First Commitment period comes to an end. So that's point number one. Certain of the technologies can be located wholly within the state. They don't have transboundary consequences. We have governance frameworks in place to deal with that. Where there is a transboundary consequence, or where the activity is taking place in internationalized domains like the oceans or outer space, then the question is less clear, both with respect to the research and the potential deployment of geoengineering techniques. We have a number of treaty instruments that already regulate the pollution of the marine environment from various activities, and one of those, the London Convention, is already actively considering what legal framework should apply to legitimate scientific research in the oceans with respect to geoengineering, ocean iron fertilization. We don't have a comparable legal framework that's readily adaptable to atmospheric and space-based activities, although there are existing treaty instruments like the Outer Space Treaty that could be adapted to purpose, but that would require states considering the necessity to do so. And in all of these instances, of course, one of the key governance issues is the interplay between these international frameworks and, of course, the domestic or national legal framework and control over actors and activities. From a governance perspective, what we need to bear in mind is the potential for the single actor or rogue state to embark upon a geoengineering technique. That's what we don't want. We want to have a regulatory structure in place for the science, governance, and governance of deployment if and when, in the light of the scientific outcomes, we decide that that's what we need to do as a society.